and welcome to Fast Talk, the ad hoc podcast from Roll for Sanity, where we become Mythos investigators in the world of Call of Cthulhu role-playing. Folks, there's too much Call of Cthulhu for just short videos on YouTube and lots of interesting people to who we can talk. So we bring these two together here on Fast Talk and see what we can learn to improve our game. Joining us today, we have a true audiophile that has so many dials, buttons and flashy lights to make any podcaster jealous.
I'm Charlie Krieg, or at least online, but Charlie is my real name. And yes, I do have an awful lot of flashing lights and dials in front of me, I'm afraid.
We'll talk about yourself and the actual play survey you did in a bit first, but the question I ask of all Roll for Sanity guests is, how did you come to the world of Call of Cthulhu roleplay? So it could be Call of Cthulhu, could be other systems. What brought you into this?
Well, I'm a very, very long-term D&D player. Probably not as long as I could be for my age. I'm certainly not the red box, but I was around then. It was probably about 25 years ago, and mainly starting to play D&D with the kids when they were younger. They'd been playing various sort of card games that were based around magic without mentioning any specific products. And this led me into D&D, but Call of Cthulhu, surprisingly maybe, with the amount I talk online, was only about 5 years ago in 2020, when my games, along with a lot of other people's, were forced to go onto line, and I joined a number of Discords and started to become aware of Call of Cthulhu, but I'd always been a big fan of horror genres, but very much in the feel of Hitchcock, and I would say the first Alien, where the horror isn't directly in your face, it's a brooding menace in the background, which to me is what really makes horror work.
And folks have heard me talk about being a COVID refugee when you had to stop everything creative and just move online. What was your first introduction, your first adventure that you played in Call of Cthulhu?
And
Was
this
it
is
The
another
Haunting?
thing. Yes, I actually write most of my own material. My bookshelf is very, very small in terms of different TTRPGs and also in terms of scenarios. And I do watch conversations sometimes in the Discords, and people seem to know so many different TTRPGs and they've played so many scenarios. But I tend to write my own because I have an imagination that runs wild. So when I took the game online and started to use Call of Cthulhu, I actually adapted initially some of the Call of Cthulhu's into D&D. And then, I know that there will be people grimacing and immediately deleting this podcast. I have seen these discussions, but then I very slowly started to get my players used to Call of Cthulhu and moved totally across to the Call of Cthulhu system. I still play D&D because I do like epic fantasy where you can basically be a superhero. But I also love Call of Cthulhu, where you're a squashy little speck of dust in the cosmos that probably isn't going to be sane at the end of the campaign.
Yes, certainly Dungeons and Dragons has a lot of following, and usually the conversations tend to be, my friends have been playing Dungeons and Dragons a lot. What can we do to bring them over to Call of Cthulhu? And then it can be quite a come down for people saying, where's my sword? If I cast magic, I go insane. And what do you mean I'm going to die? It's a different mindset. So was that difficult for your players?
For a couple of them, definitely yes. Now, my game, which is the current one, which has been running probably for 4 years now, actually spans different time periods. So parts of it are in 17th century Japan, parts of it are in 19th century London, parts of it are in 1943 Berlin. So I started to take the 19th century aspect across into Call of Cthulhu, which kind of made it easier to do. And then I started to take the 1943 into Pulp Cthulhu, which again, it very much fitted, and it really fitted the characters that they were trying to play. So there was some resistance to begin with. There was, I don't want to learn a new system, but I think it took a while. And as I said, I did it gradually, but they all came over. And I think they all appreciate the D100 system where the stats that you build actually mean something. And I'm not saying that the D&D don't, but if you give yourself 80% in a stat, most of the time I won't make you roll for it if it's something that isn't extraordinary happening. So, and again, it does help that story flow, which one of the things I really love is I'm not a rules person. I'm not a roll 1,000 dice person during the session. I want a narrative that flows.
Certainly, Dungeons and Dragons can be for those people who really want to go to town on the rules. I remember running some people through 5e Star Wars, and I was having a difficult time keeping up with, you want to do this, and it's a difficulty class of this, and I need to do this, and it's a difficulty class of 20. Yeah, no, that's not a problem. Really? A difficulty class of 20 is not a problem for you? And that's why I much prefer the simpler D100 system. You can pick it up, you can play it fairly easily. It's so flexible if you want to have magic in there. There's a rulebook called the Basic Role-Playing Game. It's known as the Gold Book, and that has robotics, mutations, all the sorts of things where you need to really build an expanded universe for your game. You'll find it in there. There's even rules in some of the basic role-playing games to take your statistics over 100. So you can have somebody with 120 firearm skill. They'll still fumble on a 100, but their extreme increases, their hard successes increases. So yeah, if you enjoy one system, enjoy that system, folks. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise that, oh, that's a rubbish system. The system you play is your system, so enjoy it. And do you get to be a player a lot then? If there's the forever keepers scenario.
I'm afraid I do fall into that forever keeper scenario. I did play in a friend's game during 2020, and I played a quite rambunctious female character within it. And I did feel that there was something, sometimes I had to sit back because there was the GM keeper, whatever you want to call it, in my head that was looking for opportunities. And I felt sometimes that I needed to step back and actually let the GM lead a little bit. And I think I do still suffer from that a little bit. Most recently, I've played in a few playtests online. I'm about to become cast in a fairly new podcast that's out there. But I would say that, yeah, I'm potentially a forever GM. And I kind of avoided being a player because I really like to set the scene. I like to have everything in my head about that world and and I love reacting to people as well because I don't play a linear game. It's not you going from X to Y to Z and the ends at P or whatever. It's a case of do what you think your character will do. And I love being put on the spot to react to that. But I have to say, I am enjoying being a player. It's giving me some different kind of freedoms in that I don't have to think about things before I go in and play. And I can react to what somebody else is presenting me. So potentially more player aspect, but I'm still 98% keeper.
Yes. I know a lot of the keepers out there do actually have a problem becoming a player. I was listening to the Good Friends of Jackson Elias podcast with Matt and Scott, and Seth Skorokowski was a guest, and they were picking apart what it actually means to be an investigator. And Scott, if you've ever listened to any of Scott Dorward's actual plays, Scott can be an absolute terror for the keeper. He will go in, and I think he actually says in the podcast he's the first to turn murder hobo, which it's when you're a keeper and you've built up a fantastic scenario and somebody just wants to pull out a gun and start shooting. It's an approach. It's not the world's most amazing approach. So the Good Friends of Jackson Elias podcast. Have a look where Seth Skorikowski is the guest. And actually, we usually try and put show notes together, so there'll be some kind of show notes on the website. Okay, so we've been a player, and the world of Call of Cthulhu is huge. So the next question I ask here on Roll for Sanity is, what has caught your eye recently in the world of Call of Cthulhu role-playing? Anything that's jumped out for you online recently?
Oh, definitely. Again, as I said, I'm not a huge consumer of buying books in, but yeah, certainly for Christmas, mainly because I dropped lots of hints. I got the Cthulhu by Gaslight Investigators Guide. We've got the Keeper's Guide coming out the end of this month, I think, if I'm not wrong. I may have to wait until April to buy it, but yeah, that's something that is, I love that time period. I think it's a great time to play Cthulhu in. I think I love playing in London because I've got references in my head. Now, they might not be totally time accurate, but I've got Sherlock Holmes. I've got Dickens from very early on in the century. You've got the London fogs. It was a dangerous place. You've got a time of world exploration. You've got a time of, okay, in more the latter half, and I tend to compress the time period in my games, but you've got these great inventions. But flip side, you've still got things like the Society for Psychical Research and seances. So you've got this real melting pot of science, pseudoscience, superstition. And obviously, there was an awful lot of murder and crime at the time as well. So it's such a fantastic time period and setting to play Cthulhu in. So I'm really excited for the Keeper's book.
Yes, certainly the Cthulhu by Gaslight has been a real gift from Chaosium. When you look at the kind of things we grew up with here in the UK, I'm always remembering the old Doctor Who stories. Whenever they used to go to Victorian London, that was the time when, as you say, it's the back alleys, it's the multiculturalness of it all. There's a Doctor Who story, a famous one called The Talons of Wing Cheyenne, which is set in Victorian London. I think Doctor Who actually wears what's Sherlock Holmes' hat called?
Oh, Deerstalker, yes.
A deerstalker hat. So it's as close to Doctor Who came to doing Sherlock Holmes. The Keeper's Guide is going to expand on everything that is in the Investigator's Handbook. One thing, you mentioning Dungeons and Dragons. One thing that is going to be in the Keeper's Guide is astral combat. Now, do you think that's going to be anything like psionic combat in?
Wow. I have no idea, because the one thing that does excite me with Call of Cthulhu is the Dreamlands. And I often set any kind of encounter, because again, as I've said, I like the horror brooding in the background. So if there is going to be an encounter with somebody like Nyarlathotep, it will happen in the Dreamlands. So it's very, very dreamlike. So I do like being able to hop over into the Dreamlands to kind of do something that maybe have ramifications outside. Maybe they come out with some injuries. Maybe they don't. It was all a dream. But yeah, certainly the cosmic aspect, that's something I'd really have to see to be able to appreciate how it would work and how it would fit in.
Yes, because it's still got to work from the existing mechanics that we've got. So we've got power, we've got magic points, we've got hit points as well. And if you run out of magic points, they go into your hit points. I have to admit, I'm always a little reticent when it comes to spellcasting in Call of Cthulhu, when you have to drain power permanently. And it's, do I want to lose power permanently just to cast this spell? Maybe somebody else in the party can cast a spell for me. No.
It can be a fun mechanic, and I have had the party, one that got had access to some Mythos tombs. So obviously the Mythos started to go up, the sanity started to go down. And he role plays it very well. And he really is hooked. He's almost got Nyarlathotep as a patron now, although he doesn't realize it. And he has had the group do some rituals, perform rituals, where it has drawn power from them and from himself permanently. So he doesn't really understand what's going on, only understands to a level, because I'm not going to give him all the information of the ramifications, but I am really enjoying this slow decline into, well, who knows what.
That sounds amazing. I have to put it up on a blog somewhere so we can all see how they get on. With the Cthulhu by Gaslight books, have you seen any sign of any kind of slipcase set? Because I think if anyone from Chaosium is listening, if you could let us know that we're going to get a slipcase set, that would be very much appreciated, because
it would be nice.
Buy a book and then another book, if there's a separate slipcase set to sit next to the others on the shelf, I think that would be very, very useful. Are you going to be playing the campaign Secrets of the Seven? I can never remember. I always put it in the show notes. So look for it in the show notes. There's a Cthulhu by Gaslight campaign on its way out. Is that something you?
Yeah, there is. It all depends. I haven't got limited funds, and I have got some other projects on the go at the moment, so I have to be quite sensible and choosy at what I buy. But if I read a review of it and it seems like something I can take elements from, because again, I will never play a complete scenario, because my keeper GM DM head kicks in and goes, you know what, I know better than you, or at least for my game. So I will normally only end up playing maybe 5% of that scenario. It will act as a seed, but I will go off in all sorts of directions. So yeah, I'll need to see what is in there. The potential's there, but as I say, I've got a very small bookshelf.
That is some great advice, and actually some backdoor advice for players. Folks, Charlie's just demonstrated that a keeper can do whatever they like at their table. They'll read a scenario, they think, no, I'm not going to do that for my players. I'm going to do it this way. So if you're ever in a situation where your keeper is saying, well, that's what it says in the rules, tell them, well, what do you want to do? What would be best for your story? We don't mind, we're the players, but you don't have to listen to the rules in Call of Cthulhu. You can do whatever you want if it works for the story. So that's some great advice there, Charlie. Did you see the announcement, though, of the 5 live stage shows that are touring the UK?
I did, in fact, and can't remember the actor's name now plays the GM. He's done some of the online streams. Yeah, I really do like his style. Obviously, they've dressed the set sort of things in bookshops of Arkham, but yeah, I love those. It's going to be on not that far away from me, actually, so about half an hour drive for one of them. So it is a possibility.
Yes, Mark Mears, he does have a great style. He's got a lot of work behind him in voiceovers for computer games, and he's done a really nice short film where he played the Joker one time. So I can imagine he will be good on stage. And it is great to see Call of Cthulhu live on stage. I know the people from, that famous D&D show in America, whose name escapes me at the moment, they did a really big event where they were on stage, they performed live, and it'll be interesting to see how the Call of Cthulhu works on stage, because they did it in the Fringe, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, certainly D&D seems to have had this very much tied up. There are some very well-known groups, without mentioning any, that have been doing live shows for quite a while. And of course, Wizards of the Coast have as well, with Chris Perkins and Acquisitions Incorporated, which they've been doing sort of live shows, admittedly at cons and things like that, but it is quite heavily produced. So it will be interesting to see Call of Cthulhu one.
Yeah, certainly. I wonder if they'll be able to keep some of the gravitas of it, because in the bookshops of Arkham, the graveyards of Arkham, there really was that close studio. Yeah, something's happening, and they were able to get the players in isolation, get that immersion.
I think that would be my main concern, because if you look at any kind of live shows of, say, D&D games, which are the kind of probably more references of, it does become a lot more of a fun time. There's a lot of sort of playing up to the audience and a lot more comedy, if you want. And I would say, in a way, kind of that overacting panto sort of style. It does become a little bit of a panto. And if you did that with Call of Cthulhu, it would absolutely ruin it. You almost just need spots on the stage, the audience in darkness and told not to squeak because to try and create that atmosphere.
It is a fine balance, because there's entertainment and then there's running a game for the immersive horror of it all. So hopefully it's near. I think they're doing one near Birmingham just before the UK Games Expo.
Yes,
So
yeah.
Cosmic Outpost may materialise early for the UK Games Expo. If I can get there, the orbit might be slightly off, do you see? But it'd be good to go and actually see it, to say, yeah, I was there when they did those shows. Did you also see that the Chaosium cartographer was on the Modern Mythos podcast? I mentioned the Good Friends of Jackson Elias podcast, but another podcast I listen to is the Modern Mythos podcast with John Hook and Seth Skorokowski, and they had Matt Ryan on there. Do you know Matt Ryan's work at all?
I am aware of it. I haven't heard the episode that you're referring to.
It's very cool. He is the cartographer for Call of Cthulhu, so he'll be drawing the maps for Arkham, and he tells this wonderful story. I mean, go and listen to the Modern Mythos podcast, but he tells a story of himself, Paul Fricker, and Mike Mason wandering around Cthulhu country, taking notes for the various books that they are doing.
Brilliant.
And to know that they've been on the ground in these places to jot these things down. The other thing he put out was he has, and I'll put this in the show notes, folks, because my memory escapes me. He's got a podcast with another chap from U2 Can Cthulhu, where they're talking about running the Masks of Nyarlathotep campaign. I've listened to a few, and it's really striking how different their run of Masks of Nyarlathotep is. There's various points that they have to go around the world, and there's various NPCs they interact with. I'm listening to it, and I'm thinking, well, why didn't they go there? If they go there, they get the clue which leads them to that NPC, and then they can try. And sometimes they're saying, yeah, we just let them meet that NPC because I know they've got to get those clues. And again, I'm thinking, but you've missed the fun. You missed the fun of going down to, let's just say, the docks somewhere and visiting a warehouse somewhere. There's a whole bunch of bits that other keepers just don't put in. I was very lucky to play through Masks on the RPG Notebook. Every keeper's very different.
Oh, totally. And I've actually, a few months ago, bought a second-hand copy of Masks because I was having there was a lot going on. I was having a little bit of a creative slump. I didn't want to cancel my regular group, so I thought I knew about Masks, and I'd probably heard 5 or 6 podcasts that had played it, actual plays, and all very, very different, as you say. So I bought a copy and I started, and I did exactly the same thing. I brought the Jackson Elias section over into London. And then I made some modifications because in that section of London, I already had the London docks and the small Chinese communities that were growing up. So I then took the antagonists over to be triads.
There you go.
So, and it was still following the same kind of plan, but nobody would recognize it as masks. And it's allowed me, and I am still keeping elements and threads of that going in the game at the moment.
Certainly, the Masks of Nyarlathotep is a lot for us to enjoy. Another thing we do here on Fast Talk is break up the show with a little bit of music that won't get me a copyright strike. Fortunately, there are some fantastic creatives who help us do this, and thanks to a recent Humble Bundle, I have this track for us today. This is Mirror from the album Once Upon a Nightmare by Nicolas Jeudy at Dark Fantasy Studio. That was The Mirror from Once Upon a Midnight by Nicolas Jeudy at Dark Fantasy Studio. That music has set the scene to one of intrigue, so come a little closer as we gather around and let you know all the secrets you'll need when it comes to becoming a successful actual play podcast. Much as we think it's reading the pages of the Necronomicon, we know better, thanks to our guest, Charlie Creek. Charlie, would you describe yourself as a connoisseur of podcasts? I listen to about 2 or 3 regularly, and I think it's 9 or 10 on my subscriptions. How about you?
Audio is absolutely my favourite medium. It started with BBC4 radio dramas back when I was a kid, went into books, and obviously over time has become podcasts, which, to be honest, is probably my main source of entertainment. I just love that I can take them wherever I want to go. I also find visual mediums quite passive, and you'll get up and you'll go and make a tea and it doesn't matter, and you'll pause it. But with any kind of audio, you really have to engage, and you start painting those pictures from your own experiences. If somebody mentions walking over hills, you will put the picture in of maybe when you was walking in the Lake District. So you engage and you start to build up. And I also love Foley work as well, of how simply a crow cawing and a bell clanking, somebody's immediately in a graveyard. You haven't had to spell it out. The human psyche will just take them to that point, and I love that. So, yes, I have something like 74 TTRPG podcasts in my playlist, and these well over 100 podcasts because I also listen to dramas based on Call of Cthulhu or different systems. And I also listen to some factual ones as well. So yeah, I am a connoisseur.
Absolutely. That's a huge amount. Do you find that each one of them is pretty much the same, or do they have unique styles?
No, they're all very, very different. And this is, again, I mentioned Mass of Nyarlathotep, and I've got to stop saying that word because it's one you're going to trip over, isn't it? It's, I've listened to 5 or 6 different playthroughs, and they are all totally different.
The wonders of Call of Cthulhu.
It absolutely is. And I listened to some where it's pretty much edited to the story only, and others where the roles are kept in, and others where all of the table chatter's kept in, and they've all got very different feels, and they can match different moods for myself. If I want to feel I'm listening to a story, I'll listen to one that's got all the other incidentals cut out. If I want to feel a bit cozy, as though I've got friends round, I'll listen to one where all that other chatter is still in there. So again, they can match to the mood. Everyone's got their own way of doing it. And I think the misconception is that you've got to stick to a formula. Do what's fun for you. That's what I would say.
Because at the end of the day, you've got to be the one producing it, making it, sitting down, taking time out of your spare time to go off and do it. Have you come across, though, any that you've listened to a couple of episodes or not even made it through one episode and just gone, oh, no, not for me?
Yeah, I am. One of the things that came through the survey, which I did, was I'm pretty harsh when I pick up a new podcast. I will probably give it 10 minutes before I go, okay, this is unlistenable. Maybe if they've got a couple of years worth, I'll jump forward a year to see if anything's changed. But if it hasn't, then I'm sort of gone. And yeah, the audio quality. If you've got people, and it's not so much the level it's put out as an overall, because if I'm listening to one podcast and then another and I have to turn the volume up a little bit, that isn't a huge problem for me. But if one person is coming through on volume 11 and one person is coming through on 2 and another on 5, and I've got to constantly tweak things and maybe find a middle ground where I still can't hear the quietest person, I'm straight away out of there. I think as well, microphone technique. If you've got an over exuberant player, which is fine, but if they're laughing right into the microphone and you're almost taking your headphones off, all you've got to do is lean back a little bit and you can still, which is something that is picked up. And that is something where often 10 episodes down the line, you can see that's been sorted. Again, another thing that will put me off straight away is you can get a feel whether people are doing this for fun or whether they're trying to make this a job straight away. And I think I can sense that there's a difference between presenting what you love and doing something specifically to bring an audience in. And I think there's a big difference. And that's why I say do it because you love it. Don't worry about whether you're going to have 100 listeners or 10,000. Just produce your product.
Absolutely. For me, one thing that does kind of put me off, and it's a style, I always like to have a podcast opening with what it is and what it is doing. I always think podcasts forget this episode might be the first time people have listened to your podcast. One particular podcast I was listening to, I was trying it out, giving it a listen, and they didn't introduce themselves. They didn't really talk what they were doing, and they started telling jokes about bestiality. I'm sure there's a time and a
Yes.
place for such jokes once we get to know you. But this is my first podcast. I don't really want to be
Yeah.
listening to this sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Tell me who you are. Tell me what I'm going to hear. Introduce yourself as regular cast members because, that person's back. I'll listen to that because people can become fans of the individuals in our
Absolutely. I think, to me, it would be treat it if it was friends coming to your front door. You don't open your front door and start playing the game. You're going to say hello. But, if it's somebody new, you'll introduce yourself. So, yeah, invite people in. And I would say as well that I have listened to podcasts where, banter around the table is great and you can feel as though, but sometimes it becomes very specific to those individuals where suddenly you're an outsider because you don't know the in joke. This is a joke they've had going for 15 years because they've been mates for 20. So again, it's kind of realizing that you're basically having a conversation that somebody else is going to listen to.
Absolutely. And you have a background in audio. Would you be safe to say that podcasts are an evolution of an audio format with which you're familiar?
Yeah, I mean, totally amateur. I can't make it out to be professional, but essentially, I started podcasting back in 2002, where it wasn't even really a thing.
I
I
mean,
was,
podcasting, it was
no,
streaming, folks.
blogging was really the big thing at the time, and it came as an extension to that. And I was using a mini disc recorder, portable mini disc recorder, and then having to plug that into the PC, record it again off the mini disc because it wasn't in a format that you could import. And then the only way I could distribute the audio was on my own website by having play button graphics and then writing the HTML behind it to actually link to the audio. So yeah, but I kind of took that love of radio drama, and started to get involved myself. And then it was only probably 4 or 5 years ago that the first sort of digital, the Zoom H4 came out, and you started to get distribution platforms, and it all became a little bit easier, and you could create better quality audio as well.
Yeah, certainly when you look at the How We Roll podcast, they've been going 10 years. So they started back in 2015. That's an amazing, amazing track record for them. Now, you've done a survey of podcasts. Where did the idea for the survey come from? Doing market research on an area where you want to be successful seems far too logical.
Well, my background, I made a career change 14 years ago. But before that, I'd had 22 years in national media and publishing. So I came from a background of designing magazine covers, designing advertising, writing copy. So that is kind of ingrained in me. And you always research your audience. You'll see on the front of a magazine that it's got an ABC circulation, and that refers to wealth brackets. Basically, you're aiming at people with a certain spending level. And of course, you're not going to put your Rolex in Hello magazine, are you? You're going to put it in Cosmopolitan. So, this is something that I was very sort of used to. And I'd been looking at creative ideas for a while, and I thought, 2025, I am going to do something. Let's do a survey. I might not listen to it, but if you're going to break the rules, at least know the rules you're breaking. But let's get a feel, because there used to be lots of standards, lots of advice from back in the day, sort of 2010-ish or before, which was, if you haven't got your listener in the first 5 minutes, you've lost them. So you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And well, does that still hold true? Is it a truism? So I created a very, very general survey just to get a feel of what people were looking for or what would put them off listening to a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it's a broad, broad area. How did you decide on the questions?
I decided to be very general. It was more in terms of, and it was quite amusing because there was one Discord that the survey was posted in, and a discussion started to go on about the survey itself. And I nearly leant forward and started typing, but immediately stopped myself and sat back because I thought, no, you're going to have a very specific stance on this. Let's just see where that conversation goes. And some people did say, well, it's very general. It's not really drilling down into things. But one, I didn't want a 100-question survey. You limit the amount of people that are going to participate. So I wanted it to be quite short. But also I just wanted those general things: audio quality, podcast length, the style that you might put out, the real basics, because you need to know those before you can start to drill down any further. And drilling down further will be very specific to a certain audience. So this was meant to be quite wide and sort of fluffy in a way, but it would give some information that was useful.
I know market research is an absolute science, but sometimes, folks, you just, hey, do you like this? If we did it this way, would you listen to this? When the responses did start coming in, was it what you expected?
In many areas, yes. Audio quality was at the top of the list there. Pretty much everybody was on there. One thing interesting that did come out of that, because somebody fed back to me and said, the one thing I have a problem with, because I have some auditory issues, is if people are laying too much music and too many sound effects behind the narration, they can't then pick out the words that are being spoken. So I actually added that into the questionnaire afterwards, because it was like, you know what, I'd never really thought about this. Now, that doesn't preclude you putting music, but you might want to use it as an insert and trail it out into the speech, not have it as a running element behind all the dialogue between the players. I was quite surprised that people will listen for up to 2 episodes to decide if they're going to continue listening to a podcast, which, when you think most of them are about 60 minutes long, which seems to be the golden spot to hit from the survey, that's 2 hours worth of listening. I should feel bad because I'm going to give you 10 minutes. So that did kind of surprise me. Another thing that surprised me was that people didn't seem to search that often for podcasts. And they only listened, a lot of people only listened to 2 or 3 and a maximum of 10, which, when I looked at it, I thought, okay, so somebody is going to give you a chance. They might listen to a couple of episodes, but this person is listening to a really limited number of podcasts. So how do you get into that? You know, they're not all like me with 100 podcasts sitting there.
No, I know certainly I rarely search for another podcast to listen to. You know, I don't I use Amazon Music because that's the music subscription service we have here at the Cosmic Outpost. And I don't go in and search for Call of Cthulhu or Lovecraft or anything like that. It tends to be recommendations for, oh, have you heard this one? Have you heard that one? The posts on various Lovecraft groups on Facebook. People will say, hey, come and check out my episode. It's X, Y, and Z. But they can be fairly tricky to find. I know there's some I lose track of. And I think, oh, what was that one? Oh, I can't even remember what it was called. It was okay. I should circle back and listen to them. And then they'll pop up. There was one group which did a session at PAX Australia, and they did a live little extension of the podcast that they'd done. I'd listened to a couple of years ago, and I'd wondered where they had got to. The survey you did it change? Because I know when you release something into the wild, it can be a very, very unexpected. Or did you just stick and you let it run its course?
Yeah, I just let it run its course. I added that one question in that the person had raised about having issues if there was too much going on within the podcast. But no, I pretty much I pretty much had the ideas of what I wanted. And of course, the thing is, modifying it and adding any extra questions afterwards would skew the results, because if 15 people had already done it, that question wouldn't have been there for them. So I decided to stick with what I'd got. I did see some people mention some good things, and it would have been, yeah, if I'd have thought about that, I would have popped it in, but I kind of stuck to my guns with it.
Very wise, very wise. So now we have the results. Describe for us, please, the most ideal elements of a podcast. Speak slowly, as I'll be taking notes, because you never know, there might be a Roll for Sanity actual play someday. What are the results?
Well, the results I would really say is get your audio right. And if it doesn't matter if you're recording in the same room or recording over the internet, just spend that little bit of time to begin with to get everybody's levels. You can do lots of work in post, but if you're dealing with a very quiet piece of audio and you're trying to make it louder, you're going to introduce a lot more noise into it. So just, get each person to speak individually, see how it's coming through, adjust. Obviously, we've got that 60-minute sort of perfect little spot. The one thing I would really say, and this isn't from individual answers, but you can kind of put them all together and come out with sort of a single thing to say, is do it because you want to and tell the stories you want to tell. Which might sound as though I'm not answering a specific question, but on the kind of things that people like, if they like chat around the table or this or that, it comes down to relax, just produce something that you are into, that you find fun, that your players are enjoying. Because again, if you're directing your players saying, oh, well, don't laugh, or let's re-record that line, you're now making it into something else. So do what is fun for you, because that really, really does come through. Remember to engage the listener, that they're there. So, you have the old Bob Hope, Bing Crosby films, which I think were some of the first ones to break the fourth wall, where they'll turn to camera. And I'm not saying just turn around and talk to the audience in the podcast, but be aware that imagine there is somebody standing over there listening, and try and include them in what you're doing. And that's really the takeaways from it. Don't overcomplicate it. Be aware, because again, the majority of people were listening on headphones or earbuds. Earbuds was probably the highest. Now, earbuds, let's be fair, no matter how much companies promote them, they've got a lot worse quality than closed back earphones or speakers. So just be aware, again, people were mainly listening while commuting. So you've got a lot of other noise going on. I know these technologies to block that sound out. But again, if you overcomplicate your sound, it could be very difficult for that to come through. So again, kind of keep it clean at the same time. And I think those were the main takeaways, but also don't expect instant success, because the one thing again was that, like yourself, people weren't actively searching for podcasts. The main ways that podcasts were found were by chatting with people, chatting with friends in Discords or online chat or Reddit or wherever, or actually a shout out in another podcast. So build up a network. Go into, I'm not saying spam other Discords, but get to know other people that produce podcasts. And maybe if they like your podcasts, you might do shout outs for each other. I will go into, a browser ever so often. I will Google Delta Green podcasts or Call of Cthulhu, and I will see what comes back. The majority of people aren't doing that.
That is a great amount of information there. We'll include some highlights in the show notes, folks, because this is some really good information. If you're thinking of doing an actual play podcast, just remember it's about moving air. the air comes out of your mouth, it goes into a microphone, and then a speaker on the other end blows air into somebody's ear to make audio. Don't make it complicated and it will be fine. Now, to have a successful actual play podcast, you need to be a successful player. Charlie, what characters do you like to play the most, and which of the Cthulhu Mythos systems do you prefer?
Cthulhu by Gaslight, without doubt, is at the top. If I want to play something where you can feel a bit more of a hero, then Pulp comes in as a second, because you can just have those skills that mean that you succeed. You are a little bit of a superhero sort of thing, an Indiana Jones or whatever. I tend to like, I must admit, when I find myself playing characters, I find myself playing quite powerful, quite bullish kind of characters. If you think of kind of the very old films and the kind of matriarch in them, or matron, I find myself playing those kind of characters. I guess I just like a presence. And, one skill to know as a GM or a player is when to shut up. So I'm always very much, if I'm in there, I'm in there, but I also know when to just sip it, sit back, and let other people be the focus as well. And I think that would be another tip about sort of any kind of sort of running a game, is make sure that you're including everybody. So put things into a game that fit into people's skill sets. So everybody can star in some way in that, because I know I've gone off topic a little bit, but you'll often find there'll be a couple of characters which are in there all the time, and you've got others maybe sitting around on the periphery. Put things in that are going to engage them, are going to use their skill sets, and means that their character is the character to perform whatever needs to be done at that point.
Yeah, certainly having a good inclusive table really does help in a game. If somebody isn't making too much noise, then just simply asking, hey, what does your character want to do? Might be enough for them. But equally, there are some folks in games who just want to sit there and speak to the keeper when they're spoken to, and then just enjoy the company of other people to carry on and enjoy their game the way they want to play them.
Absolutely.
Any war stories from your games that you want to share? Do you remember that time when? That usually how it starts.
Yeah, well, this is another thing, a great thing about TTRPGs, and I have read sort of studies on this. I can't remember the technical details, but because of the way TTRPGs are played, they become more real memories than if you've just read a book or watched a film. And my own groups and my own players will say, do you remember when we? They don't say, do you remember in the character's name? They have encompassed those. And I'm not saying they're totally balmy and that they think they're a 19th century psychiatric nurse with a trepanning drill. But when they talk about it, it is as real to them as a real experience was. And yeah, there have been moments. The one things I like to bring out in games is emotions. If I've made my players laugh uncontrollably, I've done my job. If I don't have to talk for 45 minutes, I've absolutely done my job. And I have made my players cry. And I love tears of sadness and tears of joy. And one of the things, again, that I do like doing when I'm building these stories is having those polar opposites. So giving them a situation that suddenly flips on its head, kind of an emotional roller coaster. Obviously, you don't do it all the way through because your players will just be wrecks by the end.
You can lighten the
So I had a situation where it had been a pretty dark situation with a group of cultists, which they'd had to go through and kill most of them, and one was left. And I thought, I want to do something here. So basically, the final cultist gave up, and he turned out to be a Brummie. So he had a Birmingham accent, very, very thick, and I don't live that far away from Birmingham. And I called him Brian. And I basically went along the track of, I never wanted to be a cultist. He just came up with a pamphlet and said, "Do you want to join our organisation?" And literally for 10 minutes, all the players, because they'd been in such a dark place, microphones went off and they just, I could see tears and people walking away to get tissues. Now, it might not come across quite so well here, but because there'd been that tension, that sudden release of this totally ridiculous character, just they still talk about it now, which is great. Again, it's a moment that's being created.
Created in the immersive world of role-playing and Call of Cthulhu. That just about wraps up our fast talk on all things audio and podcasting. Huge thanks to Charlie Creek. Charlie, where can folks find you? Have you got anything new that you want to announce here on Roll for Sanity?
Yeah, well, no, thank you firstly for having me and talking to me. It's been fantastic, a real pleasure. I'm one of those weird people that really doesn't have a big social media presence. You will find me on a few Discords like the Miskatonic Playhouse, Embers of Humanity, which I've got a little bit more to do with because I produce the audio for them, and Lightless Beacons, but I'm kind of just hanging around in those places. There are some things coming up. If you Google Black Creek Podcasts as all one word, you will find the beginnings of a website there. I think I'll leave that there as the social presence. It's a bit of a teaser at the moment. It's a long-term project. But if you want to go and check that out, please do.
Do check it out, folks. There will, of course, be show notes on the website, so feel free to visit the blog at www.rollforsanity.com. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll roll for sanity again soon.